Welcome back to Master Your Marriage. I'm Charla and I'm here with my husband, Robert. And today we're going to talk about something that sits at the very core of every relationship.
Ooh,
and
that
that's
sounds good.
trust.
Trust.
Trust. Trust is everything, isn't it? It's that quiet promise that the person we love, the one that we've given our heart to, will hold it gently and keep it safe. And when that trust breaks, there's nothing that can quite prepare you for how it feels. It's an ache that seems to linger forever and a confusion that sort of settles in because even when you want to trust again, when you consciously are choosing to trust and open up, your heart can still feel shattered. And so you might be wondering, why can't I move on from this? Is there something that's actually wrong with me that's preventing me from moving on?
Yeah, Charlotte and I have been there, and we know how heavy this sort of broken trust can feel, and we know the heartache that it brings. And healing takes time, sometimes longer than we expect. And it's easy to put pressure on ourselves, and it's easy to put pressure on our partner to rush through it, to fix it. But rebuilding trust isn't quick, nor is it simple.
Mm-mm. And it takes patience,
Yeah.
so much patience and compassion, and a kind of love that's full of grace for each other and also for ourselves.
I like that. Full of grace.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yet it's not just about just waiting out a certain period of time. We actually need real steps, clear expectations and steps, things that most of us really don't have naturally when we're hurting, to know how to rebuild trust. And that's why this episode matters so much to us. So we're going to walk through this together, sharing what we've learned even from our own mistakes, because if you're facing this, you deserve to know that there is a way forward. Okay, well, let's start by looking at how trust gets broken in the first place.
Yeah, big things, little things.
Totally.
A compilation of little things. Yeah.
Yeah, sometimes it's those really big earth-shattering moments that, we all are familiar with, like an affair or a lie about something really huge. And those are the kinds of breaks that hit like a sledgehammer. But then, as Robert said, there's these smaller ways, the ways that kind of sneak up on you. Maybe it's promising to do something, but then just not following through.
Yeah, consistently over time, building those absences of action.
Yeah, those little fractures, they
Yeah.
really do add up and they destroy trust. So whether it's big or small, these fractures shake the belief that, like I said earlier, that we can lean on each other, that you can protect my heart. And Robert, let me put you on the spot.
Okay,
You've felt that. You've seen that too. So what stands out to you about how trust gets broken?
Well, I mean, it's true. Sometimes we feel like it's the big stuff like infidelity, or maybe hiding a porn addiction, or even in some experiences, hiding or dealing with maybe a substance abuse problem as well in the relationship. And it just sort of shatters everything, like the ground's pulled out from underneath you. Those smaller moments, right? The small things. And I talked about the absence of action, or the absence of doing the things. Those small little moments add up, and they can still cut you deep.
Yeah.
Like, for example, when you expect your partner to sort of hear you and be there for you, and instead you just sort of get brushed off or let down, right? These things change how you feel about sharing your heart again.
Right.
And well, we've had our own part of that, haven't we?
We have.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I know exactly which event you're referring to.
I know, we're just foreshadowing because we're going to talk about it.
And we actually talked about it a little bit on last week's episode, if you listened to that one. And this is tough for both of us to revisit.
Yeah.
Like, as Robert and I prepared for this episode, Robert got a little sullen. He's like, I don't really love talking about this again. But at the same time, we also think it's worth sharing because so many people like us have been there and are experiencing that. And so we do want to share, but it's not easy for us to share.
I mean, everybody has some version of what we're sharing in your relationship. If you've had this magical relationship, I mean, I'm amazed, and I think I'm grateful that you haven't had to have these experiences. But I think by and large, a lot of people have a lot of struggles in their marriage.
And break trust.
Yeah, and break trust.
So
it's imperative to learn how to get past that.
For sure, because it's going to happen if it hasn't already happened.
Yeah.
So as we mentioned on last week's episode, when we were first married, I fell into this sort of disappointment. And this is pretty common. I think all of us start with this fairy tale idea of what marriage is going to be like. Perfect, effortless, no work at all. All love, no struggle. But then you hit that wall and there's this disillusionment where you realize, wow, there are parts of this person that I'm going to have to live with. And I'm not sure I can. I don't know if I really love those dark parts of each of you.
Well, and I think it's really about your perspective, right? I mean, because my mom had been married, what, 5 times, 4 times?
Mm-hmm.
I lost track, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like I had seen I sort of knew that there really wasn't perfect.
Mm.
And so I think maybe just
You didn't have as much disillusionment as me.
I was jaded.
Yeah.
I'm like, no, we're actually supposed to have problems. And you were on the other side, like, it's not perfect.
Right.
And I was zero understanding. I'm like, I understand why you can't be a grown up and realize that we all have problems.
Well, then
and
that
so,
makes
yeah.
a lot of sense actually when you say it that way, because I didn't handle that disappointment well, because I did have this sort of illusion or delusion that I was living in. And, you know, I was disappointed. I wanted the husband that I thought that I freaking deserved.
Right. Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And
You got him, by the way.
and when, well, in the moment when it felt like I didn't and
Yeah.
life was getting sort of messy for us, then what did I turn to? I turned to control.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes that control would come out in subtle little passive aggressive ways and sometimes very loud and very obvious ways.
Not so subtle ways.
Not so subtle.
Not so subtle.
And, you know, oftentimes when I would get overwhelmed or have that extreme disappointment, I would, of course, lash out.
Yeah. And we talked a little bit about this on our last episode, right? But it's worth digging into. So I remember coming to you, and it took a bit for me to feel kind of this opportunity to be raw and vulnerable. I think we were having a difficult conversation, and I was hoping that you would hear me when I just said, you know, I feel like this thing, right? And it had taken a while for me to get to that point, to be open and vulnerable, which of course the world teaches guys to hide, right? Teaches us to hide that. We're not supposed to be vulnerable and open. So I was sort of pushing away all of that stuff, trying to be vulnerable and tell you how I feel. And you were flooded.
I was flooded.
Right. And
grandiose.
And there's nothing great that happens. Right. And so I told you about my feelings, and then you yelled back and you said, I don't really give a blank how you feel, or something like that. Right.
Yep. I remember.
Right. And boy, that was a kick in the balls. Right.
Yes.
It really wasn't just the words. It was the fact that I'd gone against like everything in the back of my head, like don't share your feelings, don't be a baby. Right. And I trusted you with my vulnerabilities, like in that moment. And I felt like now I just couldn't trust you with my heart.
Exactly.
Like I realized, and then all of those things that came back, right? All the things came back to me like, see, you're an idiot. You're not supposed to share your feelings. No one cares. You're going to man up. You're being the strong one. Stop being emotional. Stop being emotional and vulnerable. No one cares. Right. Mm-hmm. Just go to work, put your head down and do it. And so I'm like, message received. I think I even said that to you. I said, message received. And I just turned around and walked off. Right. And at that point, right, I just, not only did I lose trust, I just didn't care to share my feelings with you anymore. And I love that quote, right? Trust is, you know, lost in buckets and earned in drops.
And that was a bucket.
Yeah, that was
a bucket moment.
Every bucket I had was just emptied out at that point.
Yeah, exactly. It was a massive fracture. And as Robert said earlier, 5 years probably, or more, 5 years is probably conservative for us to be able to really rebuild from that, at least rebuild some trust. And looking back, I obviously see now, like I feel awful. Like I see clearly how I broke trust with you. And again, not with an affair, but with something that was still a huge betrayal and something that was proving to you that I was not a safe place for you to be able to share your heart, to share your vulnerability. And, you know, we lacked so many tools. I think if we had known then what we know now about building trust, about how trust breaks, about how to mend trust, I think we could have done a lot better and we could have rebuilt faster, sooner. But back then, I didn't even realize how hurtful it was, how deep that wound went, or how even my own anger and my own dysregulation were truly eroding something sacred between us and destroying that trust.
Yeah. I mean, for me, it wasn't really just about what you said, right? It was about feeling like I just couldn't risk being open again. And I didn't want to open up again, right?
Yeah.
You know? And so it took a while, and that created so much distance between us. I mean, I became probably at that point the best dad my kids ever had, because I threw all of my energy into just being a dad with my boys. And they were both in baseball. And who could blame me, right? I was an amazing dad. I went to baseball, went to practice. I was throwing the ball in the yard because I just didn't want to talk to her.
Mm. It's hard. It's hard to rebuild trust.
Yeah.
And so let's talk about why it's so hard. Why is it so hard to trust again? I think most of us can relate to some version of this story, that it's just so hard to trust after we feel like our heart has been betrayed. And so why does it hurt so much?
Yeah. I think because you have this whole paradigm shift, right?
We do.
It changes how you see things. And at first you now see this person that you trusted with your heart, and you see them differently.
Oh, yeah.
Up until that point, I trusted you. You were my safe haven. You were my safe place. And we all feel that with our partners. The one I could share my dreams and my fears with.
Right.
Right. And and fears are all about emotion. But after that, I couldn't share my fears with you. I'd only share my dreams, and I would only share successes, and I just wouldn't share fears. And so then I'm withholding part of myself from the relationship, and that's not fair.
Right.
Right. I didn't stop loving you. You just weren't safe.
Right.
You just weren't safe. And I couldn't be vulnerable, and the world told me not to be anyways. And if you think about the key, which is vulnerability equals intimacy.
Right.
How much intimacy, true intimacy did we have? Connection.
Well, right. Because you weren't showing
we had
yourself to me.
Intimate moments.
Yes, of
right?
course.
We had intimate physical moments because
Sure.
you do, but they really didn't mean the same thing. And so that's also, and you guys can probably tell, I don't necessarily like talking about it because it's reliving, not a great time in our relationship.
Yeah. And it hurts. It hurts to hear that. But what you said a minute ago makes so much sense, right? When trust is broken, it rewires how we see the person that we love.
Yeah.
Right? You see them differently. You see them through a different lens, but it actually doesn't just stop with how you saw me. Because you already hinted to this earlier. When trust breaks, it also changes how you see yourself, how you look inwardly at yourself and the doubts that it creates in yourself. So after I betrayed that vulnerability, as you said earlier, it caused you to question yourself, right? Like something was maybe wrong with you or missing within you.
I would say that, and we'll just sort of fast forward maybe to even where we're at now. My business partner is amazing at sharing his feelings. And then when he asks me how I'm feeling, I swear my left eye starts to twitch because I still remember that thing. Right. And I'm, certainly old school when it comes to those types of things. But even as recent as maybe 5 or 6 years ago, let's talk about our feelings. I'm my least favorite topic, probably because there's still that shadow. Right.
Yeah.
Still that shadow.
Yeah.
Right.
So you talked about is it changes how you see me. It changes how you see you.
Yeah.
It changes how you trust other people. So talk more
about,
so the third way, it changes the way you see yourself. It changes the way you see your partner, but it also started, as you just described, to change how you see the
it gives
world.
us self-doubt. I thought maybe I had missed something, that I was broken. Why did I not see that coming? Right. Am I missing the warning bells that this is a person who can't be trusted? That's the hardest part in your relationship. When trust is broken, now you start to feel like maybe you're defective.
Right.
How did I not see this coming? Am I so now deficient in whatever sensor that is that I can't sense that this is not a safe place for me?
Right. Oh, that's so relatable. I can totally, I mean, there's been experiences where I felt like my trust was also broken, and I can completely relate to all of that. First I see you differently, then I see me differently. I doubt myself. I start to wonder if I got played, right? But then it also shifts to outward. It changes how you see the world around you. It starts to generalize into your other relationships, like your business partner.
Yeah.
If this can happen in my marriage, then obviously what does it say about trusting people in general?
Yeah.
Can I trust other people?
That's why I shared that example, because it just sort of was that piece.
And we get guarded. So let's talk a little bit about another topic.
The little white lies, maybe?
Let's talk about the little white lies. Okay. So it's interesting. There's different beliefs, and people think it's harmless. That little white lie is not a big deal. Just a little fib. And it's probably better that I just give that little fib because it's going to avoid a fight. Or, you know what? Robert would be really uncomfortable if I shared this with him, so I'm just not going to tell him about it. But what do you think about that? Do you think that that's true? Do you think that's not true? Or how does that potentially break down and erode trust?
Yeah. I mean, let's look at it this way. I think anytime you're hiding something from your partner,
Mhm.
right? I think you're just not being honest, and you're not sharing your whole self, and you're not being knowable, and you're not being vulnerable.
Yeah.
Even something as small, even something small sometimes will start to build this wedge because it may be small to you,
Mhm.
but it may not be small to your partner.
And I think anytime you're holding back and you're hiding something, you're not fully there with each other. You can't fully connect. Like Robert said earlier, vulnerability equals intimacy. It equals closeness. So even in relationships where trust hasn't been broken and you're not rebuilding it back, I really am now a firm believer that full transparency is so important.
Yeah. Yeah. And, and we sort of, and I think it baffles some people, but we
Right.
always have this little joke. Like for us, like she can look at my phone whenever she wants. I can look at her phone. I know what her password is. She knows what my password is. I always joke every time she picks up my phone. I'm like, hey, only my girlfriend knows that password. And she's like, that's all right because I'm your girlfriend.
Yeah. It's not, I know a lot of couples think it's crazy. Like I could put my thumbprint in his phone or
Yeah.
my facial recognition in his phone. We know each other's passwords. If I'm closer to his computer, I'm going to hop on it to go check our Amazon to see what's being delivered today. There's no secrets, right? And it's not because we're snooping. I'm not like digging through his texts or going through his emails, but I could, and I'm not, but I could. And it's just that we know that there's no reason to hide anything. If there's something we feel like we need to keep a secret from each other, then there's already a problem. That's already a sign that there's a barrier between us that's preventing us to be able to be connected. All right. Well, now we're kind of getting to the heart of this episode, and I want to talk about how we rebuild trust.
The how-to.
We talked a lot about the ways in which it's broken, and we've given you some examples, and we talked about the little white lie, but how do we actually rebuild trust that's been broken? Because in every single couple that I work with, everybody that sits in front of me across the way on Zoom, and you've seen this too, Robert. It's like the question that's underneath it all is, can I trust you again?
Yeah.
Can I trust you with my heart? Like with Robert, can I trust you with our finances? If there's been a big breach where someone has hidden $50,000 in credit card bills, can I trust you to hold your emotions together when things get tough?
Yeah.
Like when you would get explosive, can I trust you to keep it together?
Yeah.
Right. Whatever that breach is, whether it's big or small, it's always the same question. Can I trust you again? And that answer isn't just hope. Hope isn't a strategy. And
Never
it isn't just, a certain period of time, like in 3 months, it'll all be fine, or in 6 months. There actually is action. There has to be action that's involved as well. And there's 3 very important steps. And so Robert and I are going to walk through these steps with you to get today and what these 3 specific steps are for rebuilding trust that are so critical.
Yeah. I mean, I really think laying out these steps is important because often we may set these unrealistic expectations like, well, aren't you over it by now? And we sometimes think that it's sort of a 1-for-1. Well, now, I did the dishes. Why can't you just forgive me for, this broken trust, right? So I should be able to fix it with one action. And why can't we just move on? And it's usually the person who has broken the trust who's looking for just a way to recover and move forward, and they need to know what that is. But it just doesn't work that way. And unrealistic expectations just make this process harder. And while there isn't a timeline, there are certain things in a stepwise progression that will help you move along that timeline, however long that is.
Yeah,
and
so
it has to do with the feelings, right?
So step one, what's step one?
Step one is full disclosure. And this is about laying it all out. You've got to tell everything. Right.
Full disclosure. So,
which is ugly.
It's ugly. It's tough. When we get busted in some kind of a lie, or worse, maybe in an affair, or in Robert's case, like with me, it was like, I'm busted. I just was an awful person, So whatever. In that moment, so let's look at like a lie, for example, hiding a porn addiction or a substance addiction, right? Most people don't come clean all at once. And this makes the whole healing process so much worse. Like Robert said earlier, we're earning that trust back in those small little drops. We lost it in a giant bucket and we have to re-earn it in these drops. And so, and you can probably see how this would be a problem, right? Let's say, for example, it's an affair and the wife has an affair with someone at work and she gets caught. And let's say she minimizes it at first because she wants to soften the blow to her husband. And so she only discloses a little bit of the information. Like it was just once, and this is all that happened.
And it was a weird moment and just we get carried away and it's not really a thing.
And then a couple weeks later, the husband finds out more detail.
It's been going on for a year.
And then a few weeks later, more details come out, right? And each time more information comes out into the light, that trust is getting broken again. Dump out the bucket again,
And the hurt
again.
just gets deeper.
And the betrayed person is just now at this point where they're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. Like, well, what else haven't you told me, Robert? Like, and so this non-disclosure is just delaying the whole entire healing process. So full disclosure means full disclosure, not just dripping it out.
So full disclosure means sort of owning your crap and doing it up front, as messy and as painful as it is. It's saying like, here's everything. I want to make a clean slate, and we want to be able to start from this place of healing so we can start from the same place. And there's not anything else. You're not going to find out one more thing. There's not another shoe that's going to drop. I just, I understand this is hurtful, but I got to do this.
Yeah. And okay, I will say though, when it comes to how you present the information, it can be really hard to hear some certain details. So if it is, for example, an affair, that in particular, that is something where I would say you might want to get with a therapist or with a coach to kind of help you with this part, the full disclosure part, because full disclosure does need to happen, but there's some graphic details that you have to be careful with that can never be unseen or unheard.
Yeah.
Right. And so you might need help in how you do that full disclosure in a situation like that, where it is still a full disclosure, but it's sensitive.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally see how just sort of trickling half truths could be really torturous to your relationship.
Yes.
And it would just be really bad. Keeps you on edge.
So the second step, so Robert talked about full disclosure. The second step is going to be full transparency.
Ooh, that's hard sometimes.
So what that means is that if you're the one that did the betraying, well, the transgressor in this case, right, then you have to be willing to give up some of your privacy moving forward and not get defensive about that fact. Like that's the way it's going to have to be. Like Robert and I said, we think full transparency should be the way all of relationships are, with or without a betrayal. But if there has been a betrayal, for sure, you have to be willing to live wide open, because you need to have nothing to hide or nothing hiding. And, after betrayal, honestly, you don't get to withhold information anymore. Remember your spouse, as Robert described earlier, and the way he saw this, your spouses just had their whole image of you crumble.
And their image of what this relationship was.
And their image of themselves.
Yeah.
Right. And so they have to recreate a new image of you. And this might mean you need to share your phone passwords, your logins. You might need to put your facial recognition or the thumbprint into their phone, like whatever it is. It might mean sharing not just passwords, but maybe just what's on your mind. Maybe it's sharing where you've been. Maybe it's, being willing to have your phone navigation tracker on, and you're not doing it out of obligation or out of resentfulness, I guess, but to show your spouse, hey, I'm all wide open here. I'm not hiding. I'm an open book.
Yeah. It's funny because you had mentioned that on your location. That's the first thing I was thinking. Like, especially when you screw up, and trust me, I've screwed up. And we're not, thankfully we're not talking about me, which is kind of handy, but, I've screwed up, and you want to make amends. And as you're trying to make amends, you're just like, look, I'm willing to do whatever it takes. And honestly, if you are willing to do whatever it takes, then that transparency is the thing that it's likely going to take, especially if you've broken trust. Like Charlotte, again, like we talk about, we have access to each other's everything. I share my location with her all the time.
Yep.
Nonstop. That never doesn't happen with us.
No.
Because I don't have anything to hide from her.
Right.
Right. And so some people just like, oh my gosh, you're doing this one thing, but not really. You're just trying to maintain an open and transparent line of communication. Right?
Good. So where are we at?
So we talked about disclosure, which is probably the most important. We talked about transparency, living without anything to hide. And the third step is really, we call having full accountability. And accountability doesn't mean that I have to only rely on myself to stay on track, especially if I've broken your trust and I want to make a commitment to change. Usually that will mean I need an accountability partner. I need to be accountable to someone.
Yes.
Right. And if your break of this big lie, an affair, or porn is the trust that you've broken, maybe your accountability partner wouldn't be best if it was your spouse, because it really puts them in the position of being your babysitter. Like, did you look at porn today?
Right.
And, like those types of things. So it's not a healthy dynamic. So having someone like a counselor or a coach or a close friend that you both can agree upon to hold you accountable, someone that can ask you hard questions like, have you been doing this today? Are you following through? Are you being open? Right.
Yes.
And that's why we call them accountability partners. Don't call them best friends.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Somebody to hold your feet to the fire.
So full disclosure, full transparency, and then full accountability with somebody who in most cases is not your spouse.
Yeah. Depending on what it is.
All right. So we've covered those three steps that are so important. And now the big question is, how long? How long does it take to rebuild trust? And I think that's something everyone wants to know right now. How long does it take?
Well, yeah, and because that's tough because there's really no set answer.
Yeah.
And it just depends on how well you can move through these phases, right? It could be months, it could be weeks, it could be years, right? It depends on a few things. First, it depends on the severity of the transgression, how big the breach is. Big ones like infidelity certainly are going to take longer. Small ones like broken promises, maybe a little bit less, right? Second, it also depends on the frequency of the betrayal. If I've continued to make the same mistake time after time, maybe that repeated pattern isn't going to heal as fast.
Sure, of course.
Right? Oh, and if it's just something simple, and how fast I think that you try to repair.
Yeah.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
That will speed things along. And third is consistently, right? So how consistent of an effort are you making to stay on track?
Yeah.
To avoid making the same mistake.
Those are all factors in how long it's going to take. But there's also certain stages that the wounded partner is going to go through. And you can sort of track a little bit where you're at in this process by just understanding these stages a little bit better. So I want to talk about those because we've all heard of like the stages of grief. And similarly, like there are stages of rebuilding trust. And so that first stage is that the wounded partner is going to question. They're going to go through a series of 3 different doubts or 3 different beliefs that are fractured.
Yeah.
And the first doubt that they're going to have is they're going to doubt the sincerity of their partner. So that's kind of like phase number 1 of rebuilding. This first phase is like, well, okay, Robert. Yeah. I mean, he says he wants to do better. He says he wants to change, but he also just got busted. So of course he's saying that. Like,
yeah, he's just trying to get out from underneath it, right?
He is. And so anybody would say that. He's not really choosing that for himself. He's just backed into a corner. And, this is just all talk. And this is normal. That's like the first phase of rebuilding trust is realizing that's where it starts. The wounded person lacks a belief in the sincerity of their partner's desire to change.
So first, you doubt whether or not the transgressor is sincere, right? And then you begin to doubt whether or not they actually have the capability to do it, right? So here, when we're looking for that, we're looking for a consistent effort that demonstrates capability.
Right. So those are the first 2 doubts.
Yeah.
So the first doubt that comes in, I doubt your sincerity. The second doubt comes in, I doubt you're capable. And then the third doubt that comes in this phase is like, are you going to consistently do this for the long term? Right. I've seen that you have what it takes. I've seen that you are capable now, but I just don't know if you're in it for the long haul.
Right.
I don't believe in the longevity of your change. So at this particular point,
but you have to see longevity to believe in longevity, which is the hard part.
And so that's what it is, right? The person who's been wronged is waiting to be convinced that behavioral change is not just a flash in the pan, so to speak, and that the person who's the transgressor is going to demonstrate that this is something they can continue to do long term.
Yeah, and it takes a while to get there. That's why it's the longevity.
It takes patience. So these are the stages, right? And I think it's important that we see them as stages. First stage, believing in sincerity. Second stage, believing in capabilities. Last stage, believing in longevity. And you have to understand that's what's happening inside the wounded partner when they've been hurt. And the reason why this really matters is that you can't rush them. You have to be patient, right? Yeah. The person who broke that trust might be doing everything right, but the person's heart is still processing. It's still guarding. It's still broken. And so trust takes time to grow back, and expecting it to happen fast on either side of the equation sets us up for a lot of frustration, and probably, unrealistic expectations usually don't end well.
Yeah. And it's a slow process. And so if we use our example of me not wanting to be vulnerable or not opening or not sharing my feelings, right? So I would do it a little bit at a time about something that was inconsequential to me.
And test.
So that it didn't really matter whether or not she disregarded it.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually, when that level was attained, then I could do a little bit more. So it's much the same way.
Mm-hmm.
Trust is broken in buckets, but it's gained in drops. And those drops are really just little bits of trust. And you have to just keep adding on. These stages show us that we have to build it drop by drop by drop. Okay. So we've laid out the steps to rebuild trust and how long it may or may not take, but it's not all on the person who broke the trust. The person who's wounded, they have a part in this process as well.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
It's not just about waiting for the other person to fix it. You've got to meet them part way. And so what does that look like? What does it look like when you're having to meet the person who hurt you part way? And that would be the hard part, I think.
So such a good question, right? And I think honestly that's a matter of forgiveness, and it's a conversation we need to have, a bigger conversation that we need to have around forgiveness. Yeah. And I think should be a topic all to itself for us to do it justice. And I think we should do a full episode on that next week.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. All right. This feels like a good spot to wrap for today.
I think so. All right. Absolutely. So if you've been with us through this episode, what do you have? You have the steps, full disclosure, full transparency, full accountability. We talked about time, how long it's going to take, which is going to be a big variable. We talked about the stages though, so you can kind of understand better what stages a person is going through. And the next episode, we're going to unpack the wounded partner's journey and their responsibility. So if you haven't already, make sure you follow us now. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button wherever you're listening so that you can get a notification when that episode comes out. And
as always, if there's anyone that you feel like this episode would be useful for, please share it with them. Be kind to each other this week. Put each other first. It's the small things done often that make the greatest impact.
Until next time.